Welcome to another episode of Football Insiders. Jason Andera, Midco Sports, joined by Mike McCleary of the Argus Leader. And we're about halfway through the season for some teams. Getting close. We're learning a lot more on a week-to-week basis. This week, we've got some interesting matchups to talk about, including a couple undefeated teams in 11AA, some number one teams that have that number one ranking loosely on their line that could be interesting. But let's just talk about what you learned last week. Maybe watching the President's Bowl. That was the big matchups last week. Let's start there in 11 AAA.
Yeah, obviously you start with the early game, Washington-Roosevelt. Washington showed some things that really impressed me. I'm very impressed with their young quarterback, Tommy Hoffman. He plays like he's a sophomore quarterback sometimes, right, but he made some really big throws, and the kid's just super tough. So, I really liked watching him play. And then on the defensive side, Abraham Myers had 4.5 sacks, and Mandala Muhammad had 3 picks. So, they got some really good playmakers, maybe better playmakers than, a lot of the other AAA teams have on the defensive side. So, they showed me some things that, I was really impressed with. And then with the late game, we got a good one from Jefferson, as we have pretty much the entire year from them.
For me, Jefferson is really the one team in 11 AAA that can run the football. And when Nelson Wright was running the ball in the first half, that's what separates them from the rest of the pack, because Gavin Ross is hurt now for Harrisburg. Brandon Valley hasn't established the run yet. The Sioux Falls schools haven't found a real bell cow back yet. That makes them really interesting when Nelson Wright goes. And he went out at halftime, and that changed too. The entire team changed after that.
Yeah, they actually had multiple running backs go down in that game. I was talking to head coach Vince Benedetto after the game, and they said the prognosis, or the just sort of the initial what they saw from Nelson's injury, to be pretty good, and they're hoping to have him back soon. But when he's in the game, it's just their offense is just so difficult to stop.
We've got to talk about another 11 AAA game where O'Gorman played against an 11 AA team, and this one could have been the game of the year. Reactions from T versus O'Gorman last week.
Yeah, I was talking to some people about that game, and obviously it everybody sort of expected it to be a pretty good game, but O'Gorman had handled their business early on in the season, and you didn't really know what T can do, and boy did T show out. Like T is a much better team, I think, than we realize, and we already thought they were a pretty good team. So, I think this sort of reshapes the way we think about the top of 11 AA a little bit, where, we sort of assume that Pierre was one of those teams that, if they were in AAA, they would be able to compete with some of these teams. Well, T just competed with one of the best teams in AAA. So, why not put them in the same class as Pierre? So, I think this game opened some eyes, and obviously that big play at the end, I was talking to head coach Scott Fry. There was not supposed to be 2 people in the area at the time when that ball was tipped, and Ethan McNelly was able to catch that ball and run it into the end zone. So somebody ran the wrong route, and lucky for T area, they got it.
It all worked out. For me, this T area team can play anybody because they can play up front and they can move the ball. They moved the ball by running it against O'Gorman. That kept them in the game, and then they made some key takeaways on defense too that also kept them in the game. Blake Thompson with 2 picks on the day. So T area, very impressive. But getting back to 11 AAA, the other game that I wanted to touch on was Stevens and Harrisburg, 2 teams that were in the top 5, played each other. Harrisburg, they took it to them in the first half. Second half, Stevens figured them out a little bit, but is there a big difference between Stevens? Should they be in the top 5 still at this point? They've got a test with O'Gorman this week.
Yeah, well, we talked about this last week, where Harrisburg was actually below Stevens in the rankings, and we both sort of were a little bit higher on Harrisburg than we were on Stevens, and Harrisburg proved that. Harrisburg, I believe, was a shutout, so it was Harrisburg, since that opening game loss, has really turned the corner, and they're really looking like a threat here. Whereas, Stevens, they obviously had the 2-0 start, and, this might have not been their best game, but I still think they could show some things too. Obviously, they got really good quarterback and some really good weapons in the receiving game. So, I think Stevens deserves to be in the top 5 based on the teams that are sort of competing for them with that.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. I think Stevens showed in the second half, that really showed me that they could turn it around and they could still play with Harrisburg even after the terrible first half. And give credit to Dylan Elrod. He was very accurate on the day, and Max Carlson really has changed. I think him being a possession receiver has really freed up Titan Tryon, and Titan Tryon sees a lot of coverage, and a lot of teams were really making sure to take him out of the game. Well, both Carlson and Tryon had a huge game for Harrisburg, so that's good news for the Tigers moving forward. Let's look at the big games coming up this week in 11 AAA. We talked about Stevens at O'Gorman. Central will play Jefferson on Saturday. Lincoln and Harrisburg, maybe the game that we want to address here. The Lincoln team, how will they bounce back off of that loss? And Harrisburg, like you said, has played much better since they played Jefferson in the opener. So both these two teams only lost to Jefferson.
Yeah, and Lincoln obviously, they took the 30-17 loss. Well, it was 30-0 at the end of the first half, so they didn't allow any points in the second half too. As we know, that really, really good Jefferson offense. So, I think, sort of what we were talking about with leading into the President's Bowl for the Roosevelts and the Washingtons, that second half sort of, settling down and being able to compete, sort of what Stevens did against Harrisburg too. It shows good signs for the future, and I think that Lincoln will definitely be able to bounce back. But Harrisburg's on a streak now, so they're going to be a really, really tough test, and I think this is going to be a really close game.
Yeah, that'll be one I'll definitely have my eye on. I think this Lincoln team, they just have to they have to be able to run the ball, which they just have not been able to establish this year. They're going to try to do that against Harrisburg. Harrisburg's got a really good pass rush, and they're starting to throw the ball better. So that'll be a really interesting game to check out. Speaking of really interesting games, let's take a look at 11 AA and the big games coming up this week. I mean, the one that, I don't know, Yankton's probably had circled for a couple weeks now is Yankton at Pierre. This one could be fun, and if you love quarterbacks, this will be one to watch.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the games that I think we were sort of circling at the beginning of the year too. I mean, there's Pierre's got T area towards the end of the year, and it's all those big sort of competitor against peer games, and this is one of the first ones. We thought Brookings might have been, but Brookings obviously didn't really put up much of a fight in that game. But Yankton has. They've handled business so far. Obviously, they're 3-0 to start out the year, and they picked up some really good wins, and they got a really, really good quarterback in Rugby Riken. So I'm really excited to see how they sort of attack early and try to maybe make Pierre sweat a little bit.
Yeah, I think they're going to have to step up their game in the trenches to be able to compete with Pierre. Maybe they can, but Pierre and Lincoln Keenholz are making this thing look really easy. Last week, Keenholz threw 6 touchdown passes, and all in the first half. This is a guy who just continues to amaze us, and he's got so many different weapons. And now last week he found another weapon in Jackson Edmond, who caught 3 touchdown passes. Their tall tight end who has come in and basically been the goal line option. So another reason to fear Pierre. And this one is in Pierre. I think that helps them out too. But like you said, we've been looking all year to see what's the distance between this Pierre team and maybe T and Yankton. T showed real signs of being able to compete. If Yankton plays close, they're going to really make a statement here that they can compete with Pierre as well. So really looking forward to that one.
Yeah, it adds to the intrigue in AA. I mean, the T game did its job there, but this Yankton game has a chance to really make us look at AA and say, wow, this is going to be a really fun class at the end of the year.
Yeah, T, by the way, is on the road at Douglas. The other games here, Spearfish at Brookings, Mitchell at Aberdeen, Huron at Sturgis. And Sturgis is coming off a couple wins in a row, so that'll be interesting to watch them as well. And Spearfish got their first win of the year as well, so congratulations to the Spartans. Let's move to 11A now. This could be, this could be the best storyline of any class right now, the way this thing has been shifting around. Canton reemerges in the top 5, as you see there. Beersford took their first loss to Winner, and Dakota Valley took their first loss to Sioux Falls Christian, yet they still remain in the top 5. Interesting. And then West Central, 2 weeks in a row now, has had to get a fourth quarter drive for a touchdown to win the game. That's just a few of the storylines. What intrigues you about 11A?
It's close. It's really, really close, and you could see that by just sort of one win catapulting a team from receiving votes in Yankton to number 3 in the polls.
Yeah.
So, that's always intriguing. And Beersford, they had that really, really tough matchup with Winter this week. That we expected with Winter even in 11B. They dominate that class.
Oh, yeah.
That was a good matchup for them, and they held Winter to, I believe, only 22 points, which no other team has done, even though they didn't score. So, I think Beersford's really good, and, Dakota Valley staying in the rankings even after Sioux Falls Christian beats them. I mean, that's probably more of a record thing.
Yeah.
But, that just shows that some of those teams that are receiving votes, Madison, Sioux Falls Christian, Lennox, maybe they'll have a spot in the rankings at some point this year. It always could happen, especially in a class like this.
Yeah, I feel like the top 5 isn't enough to show all the contenders in this class. There's at least 8, maybe even a couple more. I wouldn't be surprised to see Vermilion play tough. And as we look at the big games this week, Vermilion will be at West Central. So West Central going for another win, and they've got a little bit of a challenge. Del Rapids at Yankton, though. Del Rapids has gotten more number 1 votes, and they're looking pretty strong here through the first 3 weeks. They've got the best point differential so far. They're going to have their hands full with this Yankton team, though, that plays some terrific defense.
Yeah, obviously, the people have spoken. Cannon's sort of on the rise a little bit. So, I think anytime a 2 and 3 go up against each other, it's really intriguing. And, like you said, Del Rapids is sort of getting those votes because everybody's kind of married to the idea of West Central being in that number 1. But Del Rapids has proven every single week that they deserve, they're at the 2 spot now, but maybe they deserve to be a little bit higher. So, this could be a statement game for them.
Yeah, it's really hard to peg a number 1 here because we haven't seen it yet. And if Del Rapids puts a showing against Yankton, like I think they could, I mean, I think they'll get a lot more number 1 votes next week. Doesn't even matter how West Central does. So this is huge for Del Rapids and seeing if they can establish themselves as one of the top teams in the class. But Yankton, that's the team that I've had number 1 all season. I think this is going to be a terrific matchup. I think it'll be, maybe in the 20s. Maybe each team will score 2, maybe 3 touchdowns, and whoever gets the breaks in this one, as far as turnovers go, I think is going to win this one. So watch the turnover battle for that one. Another big game this week. Sioux Falls Christian got their first win, and they take on Madison, who looked really competitive against the number 1 team last week in West Central.
Yeah, and I've been high on Sioux Falls Christian pretty much all year, and I expected that eventually they would get something to go, and obviously this is a pretty big win against a pretty solid team in Madison. So I think Sioux Falls Christian. I'm sorry, they play Madison this week, but Sioux Falls Christian, they have a lot of playmakers. They have a lot of people who can make their team go. So, I think they're going to be a team that, even though they're not in the rankings this week, they might find their way into the rankings one of these weeks.
Yeah, I know a couple solid wins in a row, and they're right with it. Especially with any of those top 5 teams slipping up, there's going to be a change in the rankings there. In 11B, Winter, we talked about it, 22-0 against Beersford last week. And then you've got Elk Point Jefferson, who had a bye. Bridgewater Emory Ethan, another underwhelming performance, but another win for them as they continue to try to play without their starting quarterback from the beginning of the year who got knocked out. They're trying to reemerge as a new team, and they always get better by the end of the year, so that'll be interesting to watch them. The top 5 has a lot of good teams, a lot of undefeated teams, but I want to go back to Winter for a second. A challenge for them. I had the chance to talk to Trent Olson after the game, and he said, we needed that challenge. We needed a team that really pushed us to see where we're really at. Aiden Barfus showed up huge. Riley Orrell in special teams has been very special this year on punt returns. Got another punt return touchdown. And he was very pleased with the way his team responded.
Yeah, absolutely. And we knew Winter was really, really good, and they showed that in a tough matchup for them, they could still get it done, and get it done pretty emphatically too. 22-0 is that's not a close win, but at the same time, I'm sort of looking at that number 3 spot with Elk Point Jefferson and how they didn't get a chance to sort of put together another really good performance this week because the top 2 teams in that class sort of had a little bit of difficulty. So if Elk Point Jefferson has another easy game, I mean maybe that's raising some eyebrows a little bit. So
I think it's raising eyebrows. I think people hopefully people start looking at them as the number 2 team. They got a tough game this week at Sioux Valley. EPJ will be at McCook Central Montrose, who's receiving votes right now. So, again, a huge measuring stick to see if Elk Point Jefferson maybe is that number 2 team.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you got Bridgewater Emory Ethan, who they play a tough team in Sioux Valley, who's also receiving votes. So, again, I think after this week, we're going to know who the number 2 team is in 11B after those 2 shake out. St. Thomas More continues their winning ways. Mount Vernon Plankinson still in that top 5. I just have to mention that Roncalli, 70-0 win last week, so they stay in contention. They've stayed at that receiving votes level for a long time, but they're kind of waiting their turn to get a tough game and maybe move up into the rankings. Let's talk about 9-man football a little bit. Howard, again, an underwhelming start last week, but they finished off strong, stay at number 1. I gave Wall number 1 vote. I think they've shown really more than anybody this year that they're the most dominant team in 9AA, but there's a lot to pick from. And then the big game last week, Hanson played Parkston. Hanson got 1 touchdown. Parkston got 1 touchdown. Hanson ended up winning it because they converted on their 2-point conversion and got a 104-yard fumble return for a touchdown. Amazing. But Hanson Parkston right there. I think there's a lot of good teams in 9AA. 9A, Gregory stays at number 1, but there's a lot of different teams getting number 1 votes in 9A. And then in 9B, everybody looking at Harriet Selby area as the number 1 team. But big games coming up this week. It's going to be interesting to see some of these teams maybe make a convincing playoff push. And there's a couple big games listed here. Elkton plays Canastota. Elkton is still playing really well. Avon at Hitchcock-Tulare, 2 9B teams that are in the rankings going at it against each other. A really interesting one for me is how Howard comes out against Freeman, Marion, Freeman Academy. I think Howard, to me, they're the defending champs. They've come out, they're still undefeated, but they haven't really dominated this year yet. They've had a really tough schedule, though.
Yeah, of course. And, we sort of talked about on the alternative with Wall where they're sort of dominating, but, maybe they haven't played quite as good of a schedule as Howard.
They haven't. I think they would admit that.
But, yeah, but at the same time, the class is so close, especially with three undefeated teams at the top where, you're just waiting for one of them to slip. Yeah. So, with Freeman Marion, Freeman Academy coming in receiving votes, they could give a test to Howard. So I think that's definitely one to watch for.
I think they will, and that team has a freshman quarterback who's been overachieving all season long, and it would go a long way to making them into a contender. A couple more games I wanted to mention. Viborg Hurley, they suffered a loss to Bonham last week, but they come back against Platte Geddes, the defending champs, in 9AA. And then you've got Alcester Hudson taking on Chester. This is interesting. Alcester Hudson quietly still undefeated, and Chester, area has been in the rankings this year. I think that is one to watch. And then DeSmet keeps moving up in 9B. They take on Wolsey Wessington from a class ahead. So some games definitely to keep an eye on in 9-man football. A lot of games, maybe not one marquee game, but a lot of different games that will affect the standings in a lot of different ways. High school coverage from the Argus Leader this week. What are you guys planning, Michael?
Yeah, so Friday, Matt Zimmer is going to be out at the Harrisburg game at Harrisburg Lincoln at Howard Wood Field, 6 p.m. And then I'm going to be going to West Central to see their matchup this week. So
the number 1?
Yeah, number 1 going up against Vermilion. So that'll be a interesting home game for them. I think they're going to get tested by Vermilion, and it's going to be fun to watch the number 1 and 11A sort of go out.
Yeah, I think just watching any 11A game you go to is not going to be a disappointment, and I think that one could be close too. Vermilion had a big week from Ty Hertz last week, and I expect them to be right back in it. I will be at O'Gorman for the Rapid City Stevens O'Gorman homecoming game. That'll be live right here on Midco Sports, and it's an early start, so you can check that out at 5 o'clock before you head out to your games that you're going to head out to. So I encourage you to check us out and stay with us later that night for Varsity Sports Live, a recap of all the games across North and South Dakota on Friday night. So that's what we've got coming up. And Michael, it's been another fun week. We're going to learn a lot more this week and come back and talk next week. How's that sound?
Sounds good. New desk?
Should we do a new desk?
Maybe.
Let us know. See you next week.